welcome to part 2 of our podcast, updating the Making Home Affordable program. We talked a lot in part 1 about some of the issues that are going on with consumers as well as counselors. I know now in part 2 we want to talk about some solutions and some tools that are available, starting off with the tools that come with the supplemental directives.
Thank you, John. And as we know, there have been 9 supplemental directives or additions to the supplemental directive channel, if you will, with the Making Home Affordable program. And 3 of the ones that stick out to me that are, fairly important is Supplemental Directive 10-9, which came out August 19th, talks about the handbook for services. And I know, Cora, a lot of issues have come out of, the relationship or the relationship between the servicers and the negotiators or the counselors. And so why do you believe that this particular directive is key right about now?
I think it's very important because now we are all on the same page. In the past, we know in loan origination, there's a guideline, there's a written format as to how to originate loans. But there's not been anything that we could get our hands on that would actually address the full process. Although there's been the directives and we're very appreciative. And Shane, you said there's nine in 2010.
Correct.
In 2010. But we do know that this particular handbook is the same handbook that the servicers will need to follow. It gives us some insight from the counseling industry. It gives us a heads up on what happens in the process. So it's very critical, and I'm glad we have it.
Right. Also, that particular directive or that handbook specifically will have all of the previous directives eventually, so you'll be able to access that handbook and those directives on the website, www.hmpadmin.com. So that's going to be key for counselors to be able to know the handbook or the playbook, if you will, that the services will be playing by when they access and want to know what the services are doing.
Every counselor should have it at their desk.
Yes,
This should be your little Making Home Affordable Bible that you have at your desk when you're working with the consumers and trying to apply for either HAMP or HARP.
Right.
Thank you. And now the second most important, now all of them are important, but the ones that jump out to me, the second one that jumps out to me is going to be the 10-7 supplemental directive came out in August, and it actually addresses hardest hit funds. We've been talking about that for several months now, and the impact that it's going to have on those states that have gotten a certain amount of dollars to be able to address foreclosure and those individuals that have been impacted by unemployment or a combination of other things. So that particular directive kind of addresses how that money is going to be spent and how it could be utilized, and talks about the way that it should be implemented in those states. So any comments in terms
Well,
of that?
to complement that particular supplemental directives, there's also 10-4 that looks at the unemployment program that was set up for Home Affordable. And I think this particular program kind of gave the entry into the hardest hit funds in allowing the program to provide some assistance to individuals who were unemployed. And the directive that you've just mentioned complements 10-4 as well.
And thank you for that. And that makes me, it reminds me of the last one, last but not least, in terms of Supplemental Directive 10-5 that came out in June, early June, actually talks about principal reduction. In the past, up until that point, principal reduction was not even addressed when it comes to the Making Home Affordable program. Now there's a directive that kind of lays out how that's going to work, what the maximum amount of the principal reduction would be. So that tells me that the Treasury Department, the Obama administration, is actually listening to what's going on in our communities and trying their best to be able to provide solutions for that.
Well, Shane, I think what has happened is not only are they listening to the consumers' cry and also the counseling industry's cry, but they've also put words to it. In the past, it was very vague about the principal balance reduction, that the lender may do a reduction, but it's not a definite. Here, there's a little bit more meat to it, which really outlines the guidelines and also gives the lender or the servicer some steps that they need to take in order, or things they need to consider when they're looking at a principal reduction. And always keep in mind that although not every lender will do a principal balance reduction, there's always that possibility of a principal balance deferment. And the deferment is just as meaningful to the consumer in being able to help them be able to manage an approved modification under the HAMP.
Right. I think one of the biggest things now is that the principal reduction is on the table.
Right.
Whereas before
It's part of the
it was part of, hey, these are things that we might be able to do. But now that there's a supplemental directive that speaks specifically to that and says that these are some of the guidelines, these are some of the expectations, these are some of the parameters that a principal reduction could take form of, then it's on the table now where servicers have to address it, rather than simply saying, well, we're not going to entertain that option at all.
It increases the possibility of a solution versus not having that on the table. So
Right.
it adds to it.
I know there's some additional supplemental directives that we do want to talk about.
There are several other supplemental directives, but I think the most important thing for us is that we need to know that these directives exist. For those of us who are providing counseling to consumers, we need to know that they exist and know that this particular program is ever changing.
Right.
And one of the biggest changes that I've seen is in Supplemental Directive 10-3. And that particular directive really looks at providing modifications to individuals who have FHA loans. But now, as we've mentioned, not only can a consumer get a modification on an FHA loan, whereas in before that was not the case, but they can also be considered for the HAMP program if it's a VA loan and also a rural development loan. So those are all some significant changes within this particular program that the counseling industry needs to be aware of. And these supplemental directives can be found where, Shane?
On the Making Home Affordable website, that's www.hmpadmin.com. Particularly, they can reach it a number of ways. They can key in a keyword search, or they can click on the News and Resources tab. There'll be a drop down, and you can pull up all of the supplemental directives. You can put them in by number, or you can refer to, as we talked about earlier, the actual handbook itself, which will at some point have a copy of all of the supplemental directives. So several places you can get it from, but the key source would be hmpadmin.com.
Now, they've also put some other tools in place specifically for counselors to be able to share more recent relevant information with them in the form of conference calls.
That is correct. They actually have a schedule, if you go to that website, that lays out the conference calls, the webinars, excerpts of the PowerPoints put in PDF format, so you can download this information and actually go back to your counseling shops and share this information, because we all know there are only so many hours in the day. So it's going to be key that you get an opportunity to at least know where to go to be able to download it so you can review it at a later date.
Right. And of course, as onlinehousingtraining.com, we're going to continue to share this information with the counselors in the state of Florida as the information becomes available to us, as we can do it either in the webinar format or in the workshops or anything else that we're able to do to share the podcast, anything else we can do to share the information with the counselors in the state of Florida.
Absolutely. In addition to that, not only are we going to make that available, we will continue to provide cutting-edge information by way of podcasts and also webinars to make sure that our counselors are well informed. I think it's really important, and thank you, Shane, for mentioning the PDF format of the PowerPoint. That's updated quite frequently on the industry changes, so counselors can go to that website and download the PowerPoint in order to stay abreast.
Right. There's another tool in place, Shane, that we talked about earlier that counselors can take advantage of, a process called counselor escalation.
Right, and it's actually, again, you can find this on the website, but the counselor escalation process would occur if there is a case that represents valid reasons for, moving the file up to the next level. Examples of that would be if the servicer refuses to stop a scheduled foreclosure sale on a borrower's house while the borrower is being evaluated for HAMP, anything from a servicer instructor borrower to miss a payment. So there's a lot of misinformation that's put out there in the case where, and so if this happens, in this case, there's the escalation process that is clearly laid out on their website.
So again, putting different things on the table that hadn't been there before, and these are actually tools that counselors can use to try to get away from some of the issues that we've had in the past going forward.
Absolutely. So definitely visit the Making Home Affordable website and also financialstability.gov website, where there's a lot of information and data that kind of gives you a month-by-month report as to the effectiveness of the Making Home Affordable program and how the HAMP and also the HARP program is currently working.
Right. And again, as always, we'll try to bring you the most recent relevant information on onlinehousingtraining.com and through the Mortgage and Credit Center. Of course, Cora, we can't wrap up without talking about the National Industry Standards.
Well, thank you very much, John, for giving me this opportunity to talk about my campaign for this year. And that is that all counseling agencies in the state of Florida be signed adopters of the National Industry Standards. We think it's not only important from a operational standpoint, but it is also important from a funding standpoint as well, because many funders are now saying that they are requiring that the agencies be adopters of the National Industry Standards. So you can do that by visiting www.homeownershipstandards.com and just searching for your organization. If you have not signed up as an adopter, you will be given the opportunity to do that.
All right, great. So we want to thank you again for taking the time to view our podcast, updating the Making Home Affordable program. Of course, you can always visit our website, www.onlinehousingtraining.com, for more information.